Today, we're delighted to have Nick Ducoff on Global Money Talk. Nick leads institutional growth at the Solana Foundation, supporting digital assets, tokenization, and permission environments. He previously was a venture partner at G20 Ventures, focusing on the blockchain investments. Nick co-founded two VC-backed tech companies that were acquired, InfoChimps and Edmid, which is for college financial decisions. Nick taught entrepreneurship at John Cabot University and served as vice president for new ventures at Northeastern. He co-authored a best-selling book on educational finance and has been invited to the White House for his work on education by the Obama and Trump administrations. Nick has a degree from Emory University and a JD with honors from the University of Texas. He started as a securities lawyer and is licensed to practice law in Texas and Massachusetts. Nick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I guess my first question is, how does a securities lawyer go into the world of DeFi and crypto?
You know, it's funny. I actually find a lot of lawyers end up in crypto. And I think there's this saying that's code is law on smart contracts. And this is something that I think especially tech-leaning lawyers have found very interesting since Ethereum launched. And of course, now that Solana is taking the lead, it's a very exciting time to be here.
Yeah, I guess that's interesting because that's not naturally what you would think. You know, it's sort of one world, at least to us novices, is very sort of regulated, and another is a little bit like the Wild West.
Well, I obviously with crypto, it's important to have good legal counsel and understand where the fence is. And I think that's one of the things that the Solana ecosystem has navigated really well. We recently announced the Solana Policy Institute, which is a nonpartisan effort in Washington, D.C. to help support the Solana ecosystem in Washington. And I think that's already made a huge difference in terms of our visibility in the political spheres.
Very, very important. You need to be, sort of where the regulations and the laws are being made. So, I like this title, the head of institutional growth at Solana Foundation. So are you sort of like the chief evangelist for Solana? Would that be an accurate way to characterize you?
I joke sometimes that I'm the chief patience officer because I work with the world's largest financial institutions, banks, asset managers. And while they move with size, they don't always move with speed. And so I've been at the Solana Foundation since July 2023, coming on 2.5 years now. And it's really exciting to see what we've accomplished in that time. We've had some of the world's largest asset managers like BlackRock, Fidelity, Franklin Templeton, and others issue and launch products on the Solana blockchain and Solana the asset. And then we've also had banks like Societe Generale and many others that have built on the Solana blockchain too. And so while it's still very early, we've made incredible progress with these sometimes slower moving, though very significant in size, leading global financial institutions.
Well, having worked for a large bulge bracket bank on primarily FX and commodities trading over the years, you don't have to tell me how long sometimes the attorneys can take, which is exactly why you want an attorney talking to them, because you can separate what they're really trying to say, or if they're trying to dodge behind, we'll have to wait a little bit longer than that. But I love that, Chief Patience Officer, CPO. That's a great way to characterize it. You mentioned something, Franklin Templeton and I think BlackRock have things that are on the Solana blockchain or platform. And please excuse me if I'm not using exactly the right terminology. I guess I'm not a DeFi native by any means. But so what does BlackRock and Franklin Templeton, which many of our our watchers will know, what do they have that's working on the Solana platform?
Yeah, so BlackRock, Franklin Templeton, Van Eck, and a number of other firms have issued money funds on the Solana blockchain. And so that allows investors with a Solana wallet to access the risk-free rate of return denominated in USD from both the US as well as outside of the US. And so many of them have launched money funds and are beginning to add funds that have a bit higher risk profile further out on the risk curve. Some of these asset managers have also filed for Solana exchange traded products. So Franklin Templeton is among them, as well as Van Eck. Just 2 weeks ago, Bitwise and Grayscale launched the two first spot staking ETFs for Solana on the New York Stock Exchange, and they've traded phenomenally well. And so I think asset managers, banks, and other large financial institutions really see the Solana ecosystem as a place they need to be investing, and they need to be launching products in and around.
I just want to dive a little bit deeper. So just for BlackRock, for example. So they built something that allows their investors to directly access the platform. Is that, am I thinking about that right?
So for BlackRock in particular, the fund is called BIDL. It's a private money fund available for qualified purchasers. So that's individuals with net assets over 5 million or corporate entities with a balance sheet in excess of 25 million. You can then invest in the BlackRock BIDL money fund via your Solana wallet. So unlike traditionally where you would need to subscribe, and then those securities would be often custodied elsewhere, you can now have self-custody of your BlackRock Money Fund tokens in your Solana wallet. And that particular product is through a tokenization platform called Securities, which themselves recently announced we're going public via a SPAC in the United States.
Got it. And then now those are pretty big numbers in terms of the qualified investor. I guess there are certain investments that you require something less, I would imagine.
Yeah. So the other example I gave, Franklin Templeton, their money fund on Solana is called Benji, and retail investors can invest, I think, with as little as like $50. However, you do need to still subscribe to the product via the Franklin Templeton website, and then you can custody the Solana tokens in your own wallet.
Right. So I guess the major difference is you have a money market fund, but it's not held somewhere else. You actually hold it. You have full control over it.
Yeah, it's not in a brokerage account, for example.
Right. And then so you don't really have counterparty risk in that case, right? You are actually holding on to your own.
That's exactly right. One of the virtues of the blockchain is this idea of self-sovereignty, where you hold the keys to your wallet, and thus you hold the assets directly and have more control over those assets. Obviously, we've seen governments all over the world and intermediaries all over the world, take control at various times over individuals' assets, and the blockchain helps give more control to the holder of those assets, so long as they can continue to have unfettered access to their wallet.
Right. And for a slice of people, for a slice of governments, as we've seen, and one of the reasons why I think gold is up so high is, that's become a much larger concern over the past 3 years than it had been previously, and will continue to be so, I guess, in the foreseeable future. I just want to shift gears a little bit and ask, how fast are Solana coins and tokens growing, I should say. So is the network growing faster than how fast they're issuing coins? I'm trying to get my head around how to, evaluate this in terms of traditional ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Solana is among, if not the fastest growing blockchain by virtually every single measure in terms of stablecoin growth, which this year we've seen the stablecoin activity grow from about 4 some odd billion to 16 some odd billion. So that's 4x growth, in the first 10 months of the year. Usage, we've got over 100 million transactions a day on the Solana network, 80 million or so monthly active wallets. Trillions of dollars has been traded on the network year to date. And in last 12 months, application revenue on the Solana blockchain is about 2 million. If you were to kind of look at, conventional revenue multiples for the Magnificent Seven, for example, there are many companies, trading, 30, 40, 50. In some cases, Tesla, I think, is trading at over 100x revenue. Solana at current valuation is around 40x on last 12-month revenue. And I think given the growth of the network, being, 3, 4, 500% a year, I think it's a really incredible opportunity. And this is why we have seen, just a ton of interest in Solana this year in terms of capital markets. We've had, well over a dozen DATs, that's digital asset treasury companies launch, including Forward Industries, which raised $1.65 billion for their DAT strategy company. And then we, as I mentioned, had two spot staking ETFs launch on the New York Stock Exchange, Bitwise and Grayscale. Those both yield 7% thanks to the staking reward rate. And the Bitwise product was actually the most successful ETF launch of all of 2025 and saw over $500 million in net inflows over its first week of trading. So I think that just speaks to, the voracious demand for Solana, both the blockchain as well as the asset, by both asset managers as well as investors.
Right. And then if the second part of the question, if you could just, in general terms, explain the inflation a little bit.
Some blockchain networks have a fixed supply. For example, Bitcoin famously has a 21 million fixed supply. So you can always very easily figure out the valuation of the network by, taking by the way, all of Bitcoin supply has not yet been mined, right? There's still some Bitcoin that is still to be mined to pay for fees for transactions on the network. Solana has inflation built into it. Ethereum has inflation built into it. Other networks have inflation built into it. I think the important thing is that the staking reward rate. So if you stake and help secure the Solana network, you get a reward, which is right now around 8-9%. And so the net inflation is net reward rate net of the inflation is still 4 or 5%. And I think that is higher than the risk-free rate of return here in the United States. Obviously, you've got a declining interest rate environment with the Fed loosening, and I think the Solana reward rate is going to continue to be very compelling. In addition to, of course, the upside of the network, which is growing, incredibly fast, as I mentioned previously.
So, it sounds very positive if you have the network and usage growing dramatically and your supply growing substantially more slowly. It's sort of, debt to GDP, your GDP is growing rapidly, your debt's growing less rapidly. So that should actually be quite positive. So in terms of how would investors, particularly say sophisticated retail investors, if they wanted to get access and take, be part of this growth in the Solana network, how do you do that? Is it simply by buying the Solana coin, which I have? It's been sitting in my wallet for a long time. I teach myself not to mess with it. Patience, and it's done very well for me. But is that how your investors would invest in the coin? And is there any difference to investing in the coin, versus investing in those staking ETFs that you mentioned?
Yeah, so I'd say there's at least 4 ways to buy the token, and of course this is not financial advice, and
absolutely
everyone should do their own research. But the 4 ways that I can think of to purchase Solana tokens, one would be via centralized exchanges. So this is like Kraken, Coinbase, OKX, Crypto.com, etc. The second would be, in some cases, on-chain wallets have on-ramps where you can buy tokens via debit cards or other means. A third would be to purchase securities, shares in a Solana DAT, a digital asset treasury company, like Forward Industries or Soulmate or Solana Company or Upexi, DeFi Dev, Sol Strategies. There's a number of these. And the fourth way would be to buy spot Sol in a brokerage account. Fidelity, for example, offers spot Sol directly in the brokerage account. So those would be the 4 ways. And then I guess a fifth would be the ETFs, which now are live. Some of them have gone effective, but many are still filed and not yet effective. So there'll be even more choices soon. Because this is where I think the blockchain, for your listeners, is really important to note that where you buy and hold your crypto matters, because the blockchain is 24/7. Unlike the US equities markets, which are only open from 9:30 to 4 p.m. Eastern time, the blockchain trades 24/7. And that's actually the vision of Solana, is to be an on-chain NASDAQ with a unified liquidity layer, allowing all global market participants to buy, sell, trade any asset of any kind 24/7. And so if you're holding crypto either on an exchange or self-custody in a crypto wallet, you're able to trade outside of those 9:30 to 4 p.m. market hours. And one of the things that, the industry has seen is that one way that markets tend to express risk over the weekend is through crypto volatility. And so, if you are an investor, in addition to the diversification and yield like Solana has, as I mentioned, you also get the benefit of having liquidity, meaning you can buy, sell, trade in those hours outside of public equities market hours.
You're absolutely right. I think on the day that the candidate Trump was shot, I looked at crypto. I'm like, what's going on in crypto? And that led me to drill a little bit deeper and said, oh my goodness, I had no idea. So it really is perhaps not the best metaphor, but the canary that tells you that something is going on when the markets are closed, and that is a very, very good point. I want to switch gears a little bit. You said in some of your other interviews that the Genius Act was really, really important, to what's happening in crypto and the DeFi markets. Can you just expand a little bit on that? And then also, what kind of, with that in place now, what kind of regulatory uncertainty, do we still have? So kind of a two-part question.
So obviously, the Trump administration has been a friend to crypto and blockchain. And there have been a number of administrative actions that Trump has taken to, help clarify or change things that were in place under the prior Biden administration. The Genius Act, though, was particularly important because it was a legislative branch action. It was, in fact, a bipartisan congressional act that created the Genius Act and thus clear regulatory infrastructure to support stablecoins. And that has allowed, not only issuers of stablecoins, but also banks and other regulated financial institutions to begin participating in the stablecoin economy. And the stablecoin economy, of course, is fundamental to the broader crypto economy. There's now something like $300 billion of stablecoins on the blockchain. And I think it was just of absolute paramount importance that the Genius Act got passed and kind of demonstrated not only domestically here in the United States, but to the world that U.S. was open for innovation on the blockchain. And I think that has created a real groundswell of activity in not only the stablecoin space, but the broader blockchain and crypto space here in the U.S. and abroad.
Are there other acts that investors should be looking at, or other regulatory, changes that could, in the short to medium term, that could be sort of quite positive, neutral, or potentially a warning sign?
Well, so another one that would be, I think, helpful and positive is the Clarity Act, which is still going through the legislation process, which would provide market structure that would really help clarify, no pun intended, what is a commodity, what is a security, what information needs to be part of any process for token launches and other activities on chain. We've seen a lot of this activity move offshore for good reason, but I think this is another area where the United States is saying that we want to be the center for innovation, as we have for 100 years on virtually every dimension. And I'm really excited to see Congress working to provide that Clarity Act to the market, and hope it gets passed maybe as early as this year or sometime early next year.
In terms of crypto, or a coin, should it be a security? Should it be a commodity? Or is there something else that you think would be ideal?
Well, I think it depends. I know that might not be a satisfying answer, but historically, the SEC has used and courts have used the Howey test to determine if something is a security. I think where the last administration got it wrong is they basically said everything is a security, and that's clearly not true. There are a number of tokens, including Solana, that are clearly a commodity, and it's very rewarding to see Solana now clearly treated as a commodity and thus under the CFTC rather than the SEC. But I do think, it for folks to innovate, it's always helpful to have clarity because people don't want to operate in ambiguous gray areas out of fear that they could be regulated through enforcement, which is what Gary Gensler and the prior administration was doing.
I don't think too many of us want to see Gary back at the CFTC or the SEC. There seems to be a fair amount of discussion in terms of platforms between Solana and Ethereum. And it seems that Ethereum, and I may or may not be correct, seems to have a little more of its footing in, I guess in maybe is it financial applications, whereas Ethereum is Solana is much faster, and transaction processors are cheaper. How should the investor look at sort of Ethereum and Solana as two of the major platforms, and your thoughts on that sort of tension?
Yeah, so I think Ethereum, of course, was the first smart contract blockchain. Bitcoin was the first public blockchain, peer-to-peer network. Vitalik Buterin and the co-founders of Ethereum had a great idea, which was to take and innovate on the blockchain and allow for applications and smart contracts to be built on top of it. And then Tolle and the founders of Solana innovated on top of Ethereum and said, hey, wouldn't it be even better if the network performed at internet speed and scale? And that's really where we are today, where Solana has taken the very best of what Ethereum had built and innovated on top of it. And now the speed and scale of Solana, 400 millisecond finality, less than 1,000th of a penny median transaction fee. And by the way, those numbers are going lower. Even as the network continues to scale and increasing throughput with a new validator client being developed called Firedancer that will take theoretical throughput from 65,000 transactions per second to over 1 million, and another key technological development called Alpenglow, which is an update to the Solana consensus mechanism, which will reduce that 400 millisecond finality to around 150 milliseconds. Why is 150 milliseconds important? Because the human eye 200 milliseconds is where it appears to be instantaneous when you're doing things. And now we're getting to a place where the speed and scale of Solana is as fast or faster than any application you would be using on the regular internet. And that's important because Solana is, of course, a technology built for financial applications. And so particularly when you're moving money around, buy, sell, trade, or sending or receiving value, you want that to be fast and you want it to be secure. And I think that's the thing that Solana really does much, much better than Ethereum mainnet. And there's no real path for Ethereum mainnet to compete with Solana on that dimension. And so I think this is why you see Solana being the most used blockchain in the world. In fact, Solana has more daily transactions than all other blockchains combined. And so I think that's a clear example of the market speaking with their feet and using the Solana network. And that's one of the real reasons that it's growing as fast as it is.
In terms of as retail investors, there's a lot of research and data that's available, all over the news. But sometimes I find it personally a little limiting is when you go to sort of, and not to slag off on CoinDesk or anybody else like that, you look for, why did Solana move so much today? The information is very, very superficial. They're often telling you what's happened instead of perhaps why it's happened. So, for the investors, are there, certain sources of information or websites that you think might be useful for people to just do more investigation, and then also on a continuing basis to really stay informed of what's going on if they're not really shoulders deep into sort of the DeFi environment?
Yeah, so a lot of investment firms are already starting to put out research on Solana. So, for example, I know Franklin Templeton had a report on Solana DeFi earlier this year. Standard Chartered initiated coverage. There's a number of investment firms that have initiated coverage on the Solana DATs, and that's kind of a proxy in some ways for the performance of the underlying SOL token. And then, especially as more of these asset managers issue passive vehicles, the ETFs, I think you'll see a number of firms initiate coverage of SOL the asset.
Yeah, I think this idea of a Solana Foundation actually is a really good one. And I am still a gold trader, and I don't know if you're heavily involved in it, but the World Gold Council is like literally the evangelists for gold, and they produce amazing research that they collect themselves, and they're funded by the gold miners. So there's a little sort of circular fund going in there. But it seems like the Solana Foundation could do something just like that. Be really interesting. I think be really helpful. The one thing I did, last question is, I see there's a Solana enabled phone. I haven't done that much research into it, but what's the advantage of that? And perhaps you should license that technology over to, or partly to Samsung. So whatever makes that phone special could be in Samsung, and then your distribution will be vast almost overnight.
Yeah, thank you. So the Solana Seeker phone is what you're referring to. It's the second generation Solana mobile phone. The first Solana mobile phone was called the Saga. The Seeker was just released a month or so ago. It's an Android device. It's excellent. I highly recommend you check it out. One of the many cool things about the Solana Seeker is that it has a crypto wallet built in to the phone itself. And so it makes it very easy to use decentralized applications or dApps directly from your mobile device in a very secure way. And so in addition to the Seeker having a Google Play App Store, it also has a dApp store. And so there are many developers that are building Solana native applications for the Solana Seeker device that you can use right on the phone, and it's really a delightful experience.
Wow, we'll have to look into that. That's really pretty interesting. And I'm an Android guy myself, so I will certainly look into that. Nick, thank you so much for joining us today and for the great tutorial you've given us on Solana and crypto in general. So we look forward to having you back on the show again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.